Just so fulfilling, you know? After all my years of teaching Zara, to see my own techniques blossom through her, to see my vision finally realized on these canvases. It's a mother's greatest gift. The clinking of champagne flutes at my gallery opening seemed to pause, suspended in the thick, adoring silence that followed my mother's words. The gallery lights caught the single, perfect tear that traced a path through her foundation, a performance piece in its own right. I watched her, this architect of my life, and took a slow sip of my wine. You've certainly given me a gift, Mother. Our relationship was defined in the dusty, turpentine-scented air of our attic. My mother, Miriam, was a painter of moderate talent and monumental ambition, a combination that curdled into a quiet bitterness she poured into me. Her lessons were less about art and more about sanding down my raw instincts until they fit her preferred mold. Yet I remember one afternoon when I was 7. She'd come home with a set of Schmink oil paints, the expensive kind, and laid the tubes in my small hand. She showed me how to mix the Prussian blue with a touch of white and a whisper of black to capture the exact color of the sky just after the sun has vanished. For that 1 hour, we were a team, 2 artists chasing a fleeting shade of light. The first red flag came in 6th grade. It won the district art prize, a small blue ribbon on a piece of cardboard. When I brought it home, she unpinned it from my painting and fastened it to her own jacket. Our first win, she declared, smiling at her reflection. A cold, strange knot formed in my stomach. It was the first time I realized my name was just a frame for her work. My career, against all odds, took off. My first solo show at the Trellinger Gallery in Chelsea sold out on opening night. Art Forum did a 4-page spread. I was 26, and the world felt like it was cracking open in the best possible way. Miriam, naturally, slid into the role of my de facto manager. She insisted on handling the galleries, the finances, the press. She was just a proud mother, I told myself, a helicopter parent who couldn't let go. I was paying the mortgage on her beautiful condo, funding her biannual trips to Tuscany, underwriting her entire existence. It was my pleasure, I reasoned. She sacrificed for me, now I could give back. The cracks started as fissures. It embellished my artist's statements, weaving in details about her own artistic journey. She detailed journalists' stories of my childhood that were pure fiction, positioning herself as the master sculptor and me as the clay. When I started dating a kind architect named Simon, she dismissed him as a distraction from our work. I rationalized it all. She was lonely. She needed to feel important. I was the giver, she was the taker, and I told myself that was the natural order of our love. A clue that unraveled everything arrived not in a storm, but a whisper. A letter, addressed directly to my studio, slipped past her watchful eyes. It was from a curator at a small museum in Germany, inquiring about the provenance of my work for a potential acquisition. He mentioned my late grandmother, a gifted painter whose lost work clearly informs your own. My grandmother, Eliza, was a brilliant woman. She was also a chemist who considered art a frivolous waste of time. Started digging. A quiet private investigator named Ms. Tanaka, a forensic accountant with steel-gray eyes. For 3 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was Zara, the dutiful daughter and rising art star. By night, I was a detective piecing together the scale of my mother's betrayal. It started with the money. A Shell LLC, Legacy Arts, into which she had been systematically siphoning 15% of every single sale since my first show. But the money was the shallow end of the pool. The true discovery came when Ms. Tanaka found the storage unit. Inside, under a dusty canvas drop cloth, were dozens of my old paintings from high school and college. Paintings I thought had been lost or thrown away. Each one now bore the forged signature of my grandmother, Eliza, with dates meticulously faked to look like they were from the 1950s. She hadn't just stolen my money. She was stealing my history, my very identity as an artist, reframing me as the vessel for a legacy she had invented from whole cloth. It was legacy theft. Breaking point was that night at the Trellinger Gallery, surrounded by my latest collection. The crowd was a mix of critics, collectors, and the kind of wealthy patrons who confused art with assets. Quentin, the influential writer from Art Forum, was there, hanging on Miriam's every word. After her grand pronouncement about her vision, she pulled him aside, her voice a conspiratorial murmur I could still hear over the din. My mother was the root, I was the stem, and Zara is the flower. Couldn't have bloomed without us. The art world needs to understand the lineage, not just the final product. The gallery fell silent in my mind. The clinking glasses, the polite laughter, all of it faded to a dull hum. I saw it with horrifying clarity. This wasn't about pride. It was about erasure. My gaze drifted to the largest piece on the wall, a sprawling canvas titled Nocturne in Prussian Blue. The centerpiece. I'd used the old Schmink paints from my childhood for it. Miriam had always hated that brand, calling the pigment too modern for the family story she was spinning. That tiny, overlooked detail, I knew in that frozen moment, would be her undoing. My first call was to an estate lawyer, a woman with a fearsome reputation named Ms. Vance. She listened to the entire story without interruption, her expression unreadable. The plan she laid out was precise, tactical, and expensive. A $75,000 retainer for legal fees, forensic analysis, and investigative costs. It wasn't about the money. It was about reclaiming my name. The process was a tightrope walk. Miriam sensed my distance and ramped up the emotional manipulation, calling me in tears, worried I was stressed. She suggested a mother-daughter spa weekend to reconnect. The old guilt reflex flared, hot and familiar. I almost agreed, but Ms. Vance's voice echoed in my head from our last meeting. Stay focused, Zara. The time for feeling is later. The time for acting is now. Our evidence was a fortress. We had the forensic accountant's report detailing 42 separate wire transfers to the Legacy Arts LLC. We had infrared photographs from the storage unit, clearly showing my original signature beneath the forgeries. We had a chemical analysis report confirming the Prussian blue pigment on the grandmother's paintings was a formula only manufactured after 2005. Had sworn affidavits from my great-aunt, who confirmed her sister Eliza considered painters to be one step above carnival barkers. The most ironic coincidence came when Ms. Vance was reviewing the storage unit lease. It was rented under the name Eliza Vance. My lawyer stared at the paper for a long moment. That was my grandmother's name, she said, her voice quiet. My great-aunt. The case was no longer just professional for her, it was personal. The final piece of the plan was a decoy. I donated a major new work to charity auction at a local community arts center, a venue Miriam considered beneath us. But I made sure a prominent art blogger got a tip. A famous German collector was flying in specifically for the auction, hoping to acquire a piece from the fabled family of artists. Miriam would have to be there. She would never let that narrative play out without her as the star. The community arts center was brightly lit and smelled of floor wax and hope, a world away from the cold, white walls of Chelsea. The crowd was a mix of local philanthropists and serious collectors who'd followed the rumor. Miriam was in the front row, dressed in black silk, a tragic empress holding court. She saw me walk toward the podium as the bidding for my piece was about to start, and she offered a small, condescending smile. Then her eyes flickered to the doorway where Ms. Vance stood, and the smile evaporated. I have something I need to clarify about my work, I said into the microphone, my voice steady. The room quieted. Miriam's bravado hardened into confusion. I didn't talk about money. I spoke of truth. On the large screen behind me, I projected a high-resolution scan of my grandmother's PhD in inorganic chemistry. Then, the affidavit from her sister. Then, the pigment analysis report, its clinical language laying bare the fraud. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. I saw Quentin from Art Forum scribbling furiously in his notebook. That was the first wave. For the second, I projected a photo of one of the forgeries from the storage unit, a stormy seascape. Beside it, a photo of my 10th grade art project, the exact same painting, a ribbon for honorable mention still pinned to the corner in the photo. I explained the concept of legacy theft, of how a story can be a prison. I never once looked at my mother. She shot to her feet, her voice shrill. This is a lie. She's a confused, ungrateful child trying to erase her own family. The room was silent, waiting for my rebuttal. I leaned into the microphone. Art speaks for itself, I said, my voice barely a whisper. And so do the records from the First National Bank account for Legacy Arts LLC. Her face went white. All the air seemed to leave her body as she collapsed back into her chair, no longer a star, just a small, empty silhouette. The aftermath was a digital wildfire. Art Forum's exposé, titled The Varnish of a Lie, went viral. I turned off my phone for a week. The lawsuit was settled quietly and brutally. Miriam signed over the LLC, returning the $142,850 she had siphoned, plus damages. She also signed a legally binding agreement, a permanent restraining order from the Court of Public Opinion, forbidding her from ever speaking about me or my work again. 6 months later, a friend sent me a screenshot from a local news site. It was a photo of my mother, wearing a drab blazer, working as a docent at a suburban historical museum. She was standing beside a display of 19th-century teacups, reciting a memorized script to a handful of bored tourists. Audience was gone. I moved into a new studio in a sun-drenched loft downtown. It was smaller, but it was mine. I started painting for myself again, chasing colors on the canvas without a ghost whispering over my shoulder. I realized the control I had fought for wasn't over her, it was over my own story. The humiliation I had felt wasn't about her lies, it was about my long, complicit silence. A year later, my new solo show opened. The centerpiece was an installation titled The Gift. It was a chaotic, beautiful construction of shredded bank statements, forged documents, and at its heart, a single, perfect canvas of a twilight sky, painted in the richest schmink Prussian blue. A critic asked me about the title. I smiled, a real smile, one that reached my eyes. It's a mother's greatest gift, I said. I finally understood what that meant.